Anderson Cooper, AC 360, CNN weeknights 10 Eastern.
Peter Bergen, Robin Wright, and Professor Fouad Ajami. Robin, what do you make of the White House, how they have handled this thus far? I mean, it is a very difficult situation for the United States. They've supported this guy for 30 years. We've given him billions of dollars. How do you think they're handling it?
Well, I think we've seen a turning point today, not only in the turnout of people on the streets of Cairo and Suez and Alexandria, but also the reaction from the White House. This was the toughest language, and President Obama and the State Department put the regime on notice that it could no longer ignore the grievances of the people, that it had to reopen and allow freedom of speech and expression, that it had to deal with opposition parties, and that it could not use violence. And this was the main tool, has been for decades, predating President Mubarak. And so this really was an important juncture in U.S. foreign policy as well. And this will have rippling repercussions throughout the region. The United States took a very strong stand in Tunisia in saying that it stood on the side of the people, now standing with the people in Egypt. This will send a strong signal, I think, throughout the 22 nations of the Arab world. This is not just the beginning of the end of the Mubarak dynasty. It will herald, I think, a period that a lot of regimes, whether it's Algeria, Jordan, Yemen, elsewhere, governments will have to respond to the needs of their people.
Peter, you were interested to see also demonstrations in Yemen.
Yeah, I mean, the situation is analogous in some senses. You've got a dictator who's been President Saleh, who's run Yemen for 3 decades or so, supported by the army, who's delivered very little for his people, with the economy in Yemen in crisis, countries running out of oil, the little it had, running out of water. It's got 2 wars going on. It's also got Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula headquartered there.
These are pictures from Yemen right now that we're showing demonstrations there.
Right, and I mean, the difference between Yemen and Egypt is in Yemen, there is a slightly more democratically, there are parties in Yemen which the President Saleh has sort of allowed to grow up, and they, by Arab standards, it's somewhat more democratic than other Arab regimes, admittedly a rather low bar. And so
well, you also have a heavy Al-Qaeda presence, or a heavy, but I mean, relatively speaking, an Al-Qaeda presence and active military conflict going on in several areas of the country in Yemen.
Sure, there's a southern secessionist movement in the south of the country. There's a sort of mini war going on up in the north. Al-Qaeda has inserted itself into a number of the tribes. Yemen itself, the tribes there settle their disputes not with small weapons but with artillery. This is a country that's heavily armed, one of the most heavily armed countries in the world in terms of personal weaponry, and it's a country that's one of the poorest country in the Arabian and so lots of things could go wrong, but the good thing is right now that those demonstrations have been peaceful.
Fouad, we hear President Obama's calling upon Hosni Mubarak to actually start to make changes and do stuff. Administrations have been suggesting him, telling him to do that for probably all of his 30 years. Right. Why has he just not done it? I mean, why is it just that they're so mired in corruption?
Look, Hosni Mubarak knows how to stiff America. He takes our coin and runs amok of our purposes, and he's done it through 5 American presidencies. I think this dictatorship in Egypt, it had this...
And it is a dictatorship.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a joke. And I think about the Obama administration, we should remember this is the 2nd time in a big way that the Obama administration has been caught by a popular hurricane and couldn't place itself on the right side of things. Let's not forget what happened in Iran in the summer of 2009. So in Egypt, there is another replay. President Obama came into office in 2009, and it was kind of odd. It was paradoxical. Here's this man who was talking about change, but his first message was to the despots in the region, which is Bush's diplomacy of freedom, which intervened in your internal affairs, is hereby annulled.
Right, President Bush actually stopped allowing Hosni Mubarak to come to the White House.
Well, President Bush tried. I mean, I think President Bush circled both Egypt and Saudi Arabia and gave up at the end. There were really at the end, the final 2 years of the Bush administration saw a reconciliation.
But why, I mean, if you were a dictator like Hosni Mubarak, why not make an effort to meet the needs of your people? Why not, if there's an earthquake, have services to actually feed them as opposed to letting the Muslim Brotherhood do it?
He just doesn't. This is a soldier. This is a man of the barracks. He's a man of order. I actually once described him as the cop on the banks of the Nile. He's a policeman. That's what he knows about life. He knows that life is about order. And he fears the mob. He fears the mass. And he fears his own country. He fears the bourgeoisie, the lawyers, the judges. He took away their rights. He took away their dignity.
And you've been saying he uses the Muslim Brotherhood against both the middle class and the United States.
That's the boogeyman. That's the standoff. That's the classic dance in the region between the autocrats on the one side and the theocrats on the other. And there we stand as outsiders. We can't really order the life of Egypt. I mean, Obama can't. Bush couldn't. So it's really for them to order their own politics. And in this dance between the autocrats and the theocrats are very brilliant. They always tell us, look, it's either us or the bearded ones out there.
And Robin, when you hear that, I mean, how for those in the United States concerned about, Islamic fundamentalists taking over in Egypt, how big a concern should that be? Peter Bergen says the Muslim Brotherhood, probably wouldn't get a majority in an election.
I think that's true in most of the Middle East countries. And what's so interesting about this juncture is that we see a movement emerging with a body but no head. It's non-ideological. It has no affiliation with any of the ideologies, whether it's Nasserism of the earlier Egypt or the Islamic fundamentalism of the Muslim Brotherhood today. This is something that is new, and it doesn't know where it's headed. It doesn't have a leader to guide it. And I think that the politicians whose names have been out there for a long time may end up being transition figures, but I'm not sure that they're going to be the ones who define Egypt of the future.
Robin, were you surprised by this? Did you expect this?
Well, I think that I've been writing about this for a long time, but I think that you've seen a trend. This is the last bloc of countries in the world that has held out against the democratic forces of the last 30 years, and I think it was destined to go there. It was a matter of what spark and the confluence of elements, be it the education of the majority of the people, the technology to circumvent state control, be it Al Jazeera providing images, or the Twitter and Facebook technology to communicate with each other, the demographics of it being a very young population. Right. And so that all of these things came together with the right spark, the right mood in the international community. This is the 21st century, and I think that's what is...
Fuad, more protests, you think, today?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I mean, they can't stop here. I mean, this wasn't why this revolt erupted, so they can arrive at the moment where Mubarak says to them, all right, I've heard your demand, I'm willing to reform, and I'm going to give you a new lackey government.
All right. Fuad Ajami, appreciate your expertise. Robin Wright as well, Peter Bergen.